Okay, are we ready to get started? All right. So let's see. Okay, so sorry for the weird abrupt ending, although it was kind of a funny place to end with the bright future of Russia. So I will confess from the beginning that I was not looking forward to this discussion, this week. I was looking forward to seeing all of you and talking to you, but in my preparation, I felt less enthusiastic and less comfortable coming into this meeting. Now, part of that is because I have a young child with a very bad case of the flu and middle of the night croup and stuff like that. So that was a bit of a disruption in the week, which I know Grace had a version of last week. So I'm just tired. That's part of it. But the other part of it was that, well, and it was hard to separate these two things. I felt myself losing steam with this book. That I got to these characters and I was like, all right, enough already. I've had it. Okay, yes, more quirky characters with eccentricities and vices that we're not really condemning, we're just kind of laughing at. Okay, I'm done. And I also felt, I think there were a couple of things, I followed what happened in the chapters, but there were a couple of things where I was like, I'm not quite totally clear what's going on. And again, I wasn't sure if it was just because I was tired. But on top of that, and Grace, excuse this long preamble, but I need to set this up. On top of that, I had become pretty settled in a perspective on this book. And it was the perspective that we've been talking about the whole time, that unlike Flaubert, who finds people tedious and condemns them bitterly, here we're kind of challenging the notion that books ought to present, great novels ought to present a romantic view of life and virtues and heroes. And instead, we're just going to explore people as they are, and do so very insightfully and do so with a very astute perception. And that in itself is going to be valuable. And all of those characters are going to be, perfectly captured so that they have these quirks and eccentricities, but they also have these proverbial qualities that we'll remember forever. And also, the more I thought about it and the more distance the more distance into the novel I got, I really started to feel like Gogol is just not taking a moral perspective on the world, and that I needed to, again, shift my own perspective in looking at it, that he is showing these people's vices in a sense, but he's not showing vices in the sense that he's really condemning them or showing the dangerous consequences of them. It's just kind of like, well, we all have our vices and they're interesting. Vices can be interesting, and they come in a package of all sorts of characteristics that are real and worthy of observation. And that's so really to beat this connection to death. The Anthony Bourdain thing I said last week, I was like, no, that's really what it feels like to me. Like we're just going around looking for authenticity and what's interesting and authentic. And then this is the part that I needed to share. This week, because I was feeling a little weary and confused, I said, all right, I'm going to finally do a little bit of research into the book and see what other people have to say about it. And I watched a video, which, to be fair, was not the most astute or intellectual. It's these two guys who like to talk about classic literature, and they're not my thing, let's put it that way. But I still wanted to hear what they had to say about it. And they quote, this is a quote from the start of their video, Gogol as saying of Chichikov, "Him I have taken as a type to show forth the vices and the failings rather than the merits and the virtues of the commonplace Russian individual. And the characters which revolve around him also have been selected for the purpose of demonstrating our national weaknesses and shortcomings." And I was like, what the hell? That's what he says his purpose was. And they're quoting him as saying that. And that just turned my own view completely on its head. So then yesterday, I had the thought of searching out the context for that quote. But maybe that will be instructive to me, and maybe he'll say more that will be more clarifying to me. So I did, and I found that it's from the author's preface to the book. Now, I read the author's preface. I don't know what to make of it, and I don't know if any of you have it and read the author's preface. It's actually not in this version of the book. And it sounds completely disingenuous to me, the entire preface, because the preface basically says, I have presented these types, but I'm kind of an idiot and I don't really know that much. And you guys know more about it than I do. So please, will you annotate my book for me with all of your personal experience in like excruciating detail and really fill in the picture that I've done so badly here. And then here's where you can send it. Send it to me and to this other person. Like I was a publisher or something, but it all sounds like a joke. So I wish Shoshana were here to tell us about the preface if she knows. But I don't think he meant what he said. Quote. So I'm going back to, after this long journey of confusion and frustration and misdirection, I'm sticking by my original view. And I do not think that he is condemning the vices of Russian society. But anyway, I just had to share that so you can tell me where you fall on that. Okay, Grace.
As soon as you said my name, I started to cough. Sorry. I have this horrible cough. It sounds like death. But anyway, so I read the thing that you're talking about. And I have been waiting for the right time to bring it up because I had the exact same kind of thought process where I was like, wait, is he trying to sound humble, or maybe he's making fun of people who sound humble? I don't know. Like it's completely disingenuous, that whole thing. And it's hilarious. I was laughing so hard as I was reading. I was like, there's no way that he actually means any of this. And the fact that it like comes across as almost sincere is really funny,
Well, can I throw one thing here? Because maybe he pulled an 8 Mile. This is a reference I make all the time, which is an unlikely reference for Miss VanDamme to make. But if anyone's seen the movie 8 Mile with Eminem, there's a moment in 8 Mile that I use all the time where, sorry, spoiler alert, there's the final rap battle. And they draw, straws, whatever, who gets to go first. He gets to go first. And his entire rap is an anticipation of what the other guy is going to say about him. And it's brilliant. And it's a great,
that's a
great way to disarm a bully, is just to say, like, take away all of their ammunition. I felt a little bit like that was what was going on in the preface. Like, the critics are going to say this, the people are going to say this. So just this open invitation. Yes.
I welcome it.
Yeah, I
your worst.
Absolutely should do that, because I'm just an idiot and I don't actually know anything. So please annotate my book to death. Yeah.
And here's where you send it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to say that I echo everything that you've said. I had the basically identical experience this week with the reading. Coming like kind of full circle on it. So anyway, yes, me too.
Okay, good. I don't know which of you was next, Joseph.
Stefan was next to me. Yeah, it's funny because we talked about how he breaks the fourth wall, but with this like preface, he's like breaking the fifth wall in a sense where, you know what I mean? Like, it's just another way in which he's being just really, I don't know, intrusive into the reader, you know? But what I wanted to say is that I'm very glad that you were talking about your weariness about this constant comedy, because you mentioned The Office before, and in reference to this story. And at least in The Office, you have some more serious moments. You have some smart characters. You have like the CEO who's kind of, there's this balance, and it just I laughed a few times at some parts, like the general. There was like a line with the general that made me laugh. He
Yeah.
said, "What's a general about what?" And he's like, "It's about generals generally." You know what I mean? And it's just so there's some good moments, but it's a little bit wearisome. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I had the same thought about sitcoms. It seems like in the early 2000s, there were a lot of sitcoms that were just about a lot of neurotic people. And they were really funny. But after a while, you'd get kind of tired of being in that universe of neurotic people. And I do think The Office, one of the things that kind of saved it and made it special is that some of the relationships, well, you've got Jim and Pam to kind of counterbalance the craziness, but you also like Michael Scott's relationship was so sincere and so sentimental. And we don't get much, although we do have to talk about Ulinka and why suddenly Gogol can write about girls.
Yeah, all of a sudden.
He couldn't write about girls till he got to her.
What you said,
yeah.
Sorry.
No, go.
Okay. What you've said about The Office reminds me of another show that I think also there's a connection here. Has anybody seen the show on Netflix called Dairy Girls?
Yes.
Okay. It's like that because there's like these neurotic, funny characters that the show is centered on, but against a very serious, dramatic background.
Mhm.
And the first 2 episodes are really funny. They're very, very funny. But then it gets old.
Oh, yeah.
Like season 3 just came out and I was like, oh, good. And I watched the first episode. I was like, that's a little much because now you don't get any of the background anymore. It's just focused on the neuroticism of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry if there's any fans in here. I just, my personal assessment. And I do really enjoy the first season. But now you just are focused on the neuroticism of the main characters. You don't get as much of the interesting background and the contrast between the characters in the background. And so you kind of lose that level of interest. And that's, I feel like we hit season 3 in part 2 of Dead Souls.
So I guess it's the absence of positive role models or seriousness. And then really it's the absence of plot. That's what it is. It's the absence of plot because, this is a poem. This is not a novel. We're not going to follow the conventional structures of novelistic form. Okay, but then this is what happens eventually because there's a reason we have a rise to a climax and then we have a climax and then we have a resolution because it keeps you going to find out how it's going to resolve. And then you see how it resolves and then you're satisfied by seeing the implications of that resolution. And then you close the book and you move on. So,
that's why those mechanisms exist.
Right.
Because it makes it interesting.
Right. And the other thing I'm very acutely aware of about myself is that my brain is an integrating machine. Like it is always, always, always on the premise of looking for how does this fit in? How does this relate? How does this connect? Where is this going? What does it all add up to? And that means when something is not very clearly on that premise, it's really hard. I struggle because I'm still looking for that.
And if it's not there, then you're naturally going to get frustrated. It's
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's partly, I think it's partly a virtue. I think that's a good thing, a good way to approach thought and literature, even though it doesn't all admit of that. But I think it's also a survival necessity because my brain just has very, very limited storage. So I really got to pare things down. Ray, I'm dying to hear.
Well, I feel honored. But I'm also getting a bit tired of the shtick. Like it's still fun. It's still riot. And I guess I just wish, like what you're saying, that there were just more serious stuff that gets into there. Just a little more like tenderness and sentimentality, or just something of just like with Pushkin, like you did have that like moment of like, oh yes, this is a real tragedy right here. This is bad. I just wish there was more of that in the book.
Mhm.
And like I still love, Peter Petrovich. Like he's just a riot. He's just so
Mhm.
much fun. This this
His
huge
joke,
ball of a man.
his name must, I wish I could appreciate the joke in the names, because that name has to be a joke too. Because weren't there three? I'm pretty sure there were three P's. Like in
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember the last
I
one,
remember the other one.
but
Yeah.
I was just, but I will say this about the plot issue. It's not necessary for maybe a story to have a plot exactly, but at least a progression,
Mhm.
at least some direction you're moving in. Like Sinclair Lewis novels don't have a plot, strictly speaking. Like it's just like, okay, Elmer Gantry's in school, and Elmer Gantry's in the Methodist Church, and Elmer Gantry's having a hard time, and Elmer Gantry's now, I don't know, Baptist. I forget the whole back and forth, um, but it's like there's at least some sort of overarching direction they're moving in, and there's no direction with Gogol. It's just sort of like, well, we've got ourselves into a real mess, so let's drive off and forget all about it.
Yeah.
At least that's what it seems like. Like I
Yeah.
don't think like like it would have been interesting if there had been more confrontation, and then like, okay, well, how does your Chichikov handle
Mhm.
this disaster and something, but he does what he do, which is just keep on moving.
Yeah. Or at the beginning, we were kind of, Greta made the comparison to Canterbury Tales, but we had said something at the beginning about, maybe by making this offer, he's going to reveal something important about each of the characters, which is sort of happens, but that's not really the purpose of it. And there's no kind of lessons drawn or deliberate comparison of types or anything like that. So there's not even a progression in that sense. It's just like kind of moving haphazardly from one to the next.
Yeah, I mean, Chichikov, I know they spent a long time on his characterization, but I can't help just thinking of him as a framing device.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
and
yeah,
that's sort of what's going on with the Canterbury Tales. Like the reason why it's a bunch of stories is, well, it's and all the traveling. It's a framing device.
Mhm.
That's all there is to it, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with a framing device. Those can be fun.
Mhm.
Um, but it's just I want a little more direction, and I was very worried when it just suddenly said this part of the manuscript is missing, and it's just like, are we actually going to come back to those characters? Is this 10 months later? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
please, Gogol. I was interested in Anton Ivanovich or whatever the that character was, because he seemed to have a little bit of soul to him and
Yeah.
tragedy. I just
Mhm.
want a little more. And like Lewis, like again, just to contrast it with Lewis, and this is my argument that your next book should be a Lewis one, but
Okay.
is that he's very, very, very funny, Lewis. Like he's a
Mhm.
riot, and there's at least
Mhm.
one sentence, like at least every other page, that you wish you had said. But
Mhm.
he's also really like, there is the pathos, there is the emotion that gets in there at the
Mhm.
same time. It doesn't feel fatuous like
Mhm.
Vogel does. It feels like, to a degree.
Mhm. And Shoshana's not here to tell us the history of it, but I did read something in passing that he actually started to kind of go insane writing this novel, and that coming out of it was like breathing fresh air again, like he had been. So he's laughing, but I have a quote somewhere that says, you can feel the tears behind the laughter. Not feel the tears in the sense that he's creating a sense of pathos, but just how long can you laugh and
Yeah.
not feel just anguish and depression.
Yeah, I feel
Um,
like he should have just stuck to short stories, or maybe a novella. Like
mhm.
that feels like the more appropriate narrative form for him.
Well, and clearly he had some goal for this that was beyond what we actually have access to, but I guess we shall never know what it was or whether it was attainable.
Yeah. I think I
Um,
read that he destroyed part two shortly before he
yeah,
died. He tried to
yes,
burn it.
that's right. Yeah,
Sad.
and then never wrote part 3.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be. Yeah.
Well, I guess what I'd say, just in terms of his goal, which is part of the earlier discussion, I do feel it's just, his goal is just, he really likes showing people. He really likes investigating all their little quirks. He's like I forget the word, entomologist, just
Mhm.
studying all these different insects. And I
Yeah.
use insect in the cutest way possible, bug,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, because
But
uh,
I mean less his goal in reality and more his goal, his less his subconscious goal than his conscious goal, because I think there was a conscious goal from, at least from the things I've casually read, that he was going to have the characters redeem themselves somehow, or there was going to be some or he felt pressured to do that, or there was something where there was going to be an evolution in this character in the end, and that he may just not have been capable of that because it wasn't his actual goal. That's not the goal that we see playing out on these pages. So, well, let's talk about some of the concretes of these chapters, and then I have some other quotes that I wanted to share that I discovered as I was feeling demoralized and looking for help. So first, Andrei Ivanovich. I think the other thing that's made me feel a little weary, on the one hand, I sympathize with the longing for a little more serious sentimentality and pathos, but on the other hand, it's depressing. I mean, the miserly character, was that Plyushkin?
Yeah.
He was depressing, and Andrei Ivanovich is depressing. So I just sort of got wearied by the stories that were a little bit funny and also very dreadful at the same time. So I did love this introduction of him. And once again, I don't have a specific type in mind, or sorry, I don't have a specific person in mind with this type, so don't try to mind read and figure out who I'm talking about. But I just feel like when you read this, you know somebody like this.
Mhm.
Andrei Ivanovich went off to his study to set to work seriously, and serious his occupation certainly was. It consisted in thinking over a work, that was the occupation, thinking over a work which had been continually thought over for a long time past. This work was to deal with, very simply, all Russia from every point of view.
Very
Civic,
simple.
political, religious, philosophical, to solve the difficult questions and problems that beset her and define clearly her great future. In short, it was a work of wide scope, but so far it had not gone beyond the stage of meditation. The pen was bitten, sketches made their appearance on the paper, and then it was all pushed aside. A book was taken up. Then came sipping a cup of coffee. Then he played a game of chess with himself. I mean, I suppose to a certain extent we can all relate to this character within ourselves. Set out to do something great, and then all that we accomplish is chewing our pen and sipping coffee. Certainly have had those moments.
Yeah, I have too.
But it also seems like a very distinct type who is an idler and a sluggard, but still fancies himself a world-changing intellect.
I dated a guy like that.
Tell us more, Grace.
This is going to be posted on the internet, so I won't.
Any other?
His name was this, and he did this.
Let's see. I don't know. Ray's shared a lot that could be.
That's true.
But
there have been no specific details, right?
That's true. That's true. No names. We've left out names. Any comments on that? Okay, so then there was the introduction of his teachers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the part that I wanted to comment.
Do you have something to say about that? Yeah.
Well, it's just that, like, this, how do I phrase this? Okay, I have a thought, but the words are not here yet.
That's okay.
I'll do my best. I enjoyed reading this part because it had a little bit more of the sentimentality that we've been talking about, how we don't get a lot of in the book. But I also had the experience of second guessing myself about that sentimentality, because 2 weeks ago, when we were talking about, something that was a little bit more serious, his description of like the difference between like the lofty delight, the feelings of lofty delight or
Uh-huh.
that you get from comedy, and the feelings of like more serious emotions that you get from something more dramatic. And I think it was Shoshana who brought up that like he might have just been messing with us. Like that
Yeah.
whole thing was a joke.
Yeah.
And so now I've gotten to this point where it's like I come across the sentimentality and I'm like, yeah, but like,
It.
are you making fun of me for
Mhm.
having feelings about this? Because I kind of feel
Mhm.
like you might be. And then I
Yes.
get a little bashful.
Yes. Yes, totally. Yeah, there's that Greta, who's not here. We're talking the other day about the scene about being on the road,
Mhm.
right? There's
Yeah.
this kind of romantic, sentimental description of what it is to be on the road. And we can relate to that description, but he's talking about Chichikov, and it's not how Chichikov is experiencing
No.
being on the road. So either it's a complete departure from the moment at hand,
Mhm.
or it's a joke because he's juxtaposing how Chichikov is actually looking at being on the road with how one might look at being on the road. But in any case, it's not backed up by something real and sentimental. So yeah, I have the same feeling of feeling a little bit made fun of when he romanticizes something.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad that you know what I'm talking about, because I was like,
Totally.
how do I say this? But you get
But
it.
yeah, I like what you're adding to that. It like makes you approach everything with a little bit of skepticism, or
Good.
like, oh man, I fell for it again. Like I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
He went on this romantic aside, and I was like, oh yeah. Oh no, he's joking. Like he's
He's messing with
doesn't
me.
mean it. Yeah. Ray.
Yeah, I just don't have that same feeling with Gogol. I don't feel that doubt about him. Like during like that the big like on the road sequence.
Mhm.
I felt like he really does love it. Like, he again there's that mock heroic terms he's using, but I think he means it in a big
Mm.
way. And I don't he makes I think he
Yeah.
might make fun of
I
people.
apologize. I have to step away for 1 minute. I'll be right back, but go ahead.
Um I think he makes fun of people who are like who just you're the sort of person who just wants to ignore all the defects that characters have, or who thinks that this is a I don't know rude or impolite book or something like that. I think like, that's the sort of person he makes fun of. But I think when he's like saying like, oh, it's great being on the road, like I can see Gogol. He just loves seeing all these people. Like
Yeah,
there's,
sure.
he just delights in it. And I think like all that stuff about, the schoolmaster stuff is like, it's like he really. I don't think there's any like he's not tricking us. He's not going to be sentiment. He's not going to sort of pull the rug from under us. I don't feel he's a spiteful person or an ill-willed kind of person like that.
Mhm.
I just think he's so I don't know where you're quite getting that anxiety there, Grace.
It might be just me. I am getting it from the idea of the how do I want to say it? The idea that like when he brought forth, I'm mostly comparing it to that passage that we talked about and that we all loved of comparing the pursuit of laughter to the pursuit of more serious emotion, and how that was and how those values should be seen as equal. And then it was proposed in the group discussion about that section that he might have just been messing around, that that's not truly how he feels. And so since then, I'm just a little bit more on guard against it. I don't necessarily like dislike anything because of that, but I do find myself being a bit more skeptical or being a bit more on guard in case the idea of a certain passage is actually to be like, oh, more sarcastic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can understand that. I just can't imagine Gogol being sarcastic in that way. At
What
least,
about the oh Russia, like when he uses that language? Do you take that as earnest too?
I think it is earnest. Like I think he really does love. Well, I mean, I
Okay.
think it's actually in that sort of phrase from that little story that they're telling of, love us love us dirty for everyone else loves us clean. It's like, yeah, he really he looks at those defects with a smiling tenderness. He finds them so interesting and fun. Like there's a bit from Anna Karenina where Karenin is going to go. You know, he has difficulty with emotions, but he's a very intelligent man. And he goes off and like, oh, you know, he tells Anna like, hey, I'm going to go read, you know, poetry or something. And he's not a very good at thinking those emotional terms or just engaging with that part of him. And Anna looks at him, you know, smiled at him as one smiles the vices of a loved one. Um, like there's just something kind of he finds those sorts of things endearing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but that line is the worst defense you could give for yourself, because that whole story was a joke that got laughed at for pages, and the guy kept getting it wrong. Love us clean, was that it? No, it was. It was love us dirty.
I mean, I feel like I do think it's hard for me to express.
Okay.
I know what you're doing there, but
I mean, I sympathize with that sentiment.
I really feel like he really loves people in a way. At least he loves the ones that are interesting and are colorful and something flamboyant about them. The only sort of person he dislike is the one who's styled and conformist and you know, like a Homais. You know, I think Homais he despises.
Yeah.
Or
well, because he does seem primarily to be looking for authenticity. That's what he wants, to find people who are real, and that seems to be the standard of his kind of personal standard of virtue. Just does he regard them as real? Now, I think it's a kind of strange way of looking at the world, because like we've said, he's not considering the actual consequences to a person's soul and to those around him in having these characteristics. But in any case, does seem to be how he looks at the world. Molly.
Yeah, I think you're both right, even though you're saying different things. Grace feels tricked, and Ray feels like he's being sincere. Mm-hmm. I think that all these passages that we've listed, the on the road, the Russia, the Plyushkin, when he's writing them as set pieces, he's sincere. He's a sincere author. He really actually believes what he's writing. But then he inserts it into this novel and it doesn't fit because it isn't integrated. There's no one theme that ties these things together. And so it is like Greta was saying, Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales has these long-winded, preachy sermons by the nun and the priest and all these characters that are very religious. They give these very religious set pieces. And then there's this bawdy Miller's Tale and these comic things that make fun of that kind of thinking. And they're both in one book, but it's all Chaucer. And I think he really does mean it when he is being religious. And then he goes into a different mindset. He's kind of compartmentalizing the way he sees the world. And he probably sincerely believes both, but they don't belong in one story unless you have a framing device that is, and now I'm going to tell you a completely different story. And now this, and now this. And this. So it is like a set of tales, and whatever page you're on is going to be, that's the mood we're in. But it's not.
Yeah. So I guess what feels like the contradiction is he just content with people as they are, or does he want them to be different than they are? That's never quite clear to me. So I have a good example here with this. But what's that?
I think he's torn.
He's torn. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that's what drove him mad, is he has these two viewpoints that are not reconcilable.
Yeah. No, I think that definitely seems possible. So there was in the section about, I forget his name because I never remember names, but our first big character in this section. with his
Names the
child,
T's
Andrei
and the Y's that I can't.
Andrei Ivanovich. There was on my page, for me, it's on page 271. It says he became he developed a quiet, dumbly sorrowful, aching regret at his own activity. And the rich treasure of lofty feelings that had glowed within him like molten metal had not been tempered like steel. That's a great line, by the way. And now his will had no elasticity and was impotent. And then there's this section that says, who could cry to the soul in a living, rousing voice, the rousing word forward, which the Russian at every stage and every condition and calling thirsts to hear? Where is the man who can utter that all-powerful word forward in the language of our Russian soul, who, knowing all the strength and quality of the depth of our nature, can, with one wonder-working gesture, spur the Russian on to the higher life? Like, okay, now we're talking about being spurred on to the higher life, or are we just enjoying these quirky characters for who and what they are? Which is it? But that's why, I mean, I'm completely sympathetic with the idea that I read that and it feels insincere because it doesn't match the tone of the rest. Greta?
That's it, because it doesn't match.
Well, it's funny because you brought up Canterbury Tales again, and specifically the Preacher's Tale. That's the one I was telling you, Mom, that is just like a complete fight every time about whether it's serious or not at all.
Oh.
Because that's the one where it's imitating Thomas Aquinas's form of writing, where it's like, here are the objections, and then here's the thing, and like, it's so boring. Like, it's so boring and it's so long. And so half of our teachers think it's a total joke and mocking, and the other half are like, no, it's like, it's a really good theological thing. And like, one of my teachers was just like, just to get through it, you have to just think it's funny, because otherwise it's going to be a miserable thing. And like, I want you to not like hate this assignment, so just please like think it's funny. So I don't know.
I think it's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Right.
Yeah, I read that and I just felt that like, yeah, there's a sense in which he's not writing about characters that are rising above. That's not really part of his universe exactly, like striving to be better.
Yeah.
But I feel there is a certain part of him who, like, yeah, like, it'd be great to do that. It'd be great if there were such people around who could do that for us. But, you know, like, that's they're not really the people I'm going to be talking about right now, or that's
Right.
not the
But
sort of
it's
situation.
just, but you have to acknowledge the inconsistency of it because it's written in such a rousing style. I mean, it sounds like a call to arms of the people who would move us forward. So that doesn't sound like, oh, that would be nice.
I don't feel the inconsistency. I feel like it's like, yeah, there's this part of him who would like to be roused. There's this part of him who, like, he knows that those exist, and it's great to be, forward. Like, that's an emotion that they can all resonate with, but it's not something that he acts on or lives with himself. It's just sort of like a nice, I almost want to say it's a very pleasant sort of fantasy, or a pleasant exotic experience relative to him.
Mhm.
Versus, and there's like, yeah, like, that's a thing out there. It'd be great if we were called up, but
Mhm.
that's not where we are.
Maybe we're just using inconsistency in a different way, because just like the novel doesn't seem to have an integrating theme, if that's true, it seems like his soul doesn't have an integrating theme. Like, he's got these longings, but he also has this attitude, and it just sounds like kind of a hodgepodge of personal characteristics, which is fine. I mean, this might be the genuine expression of that hodgepodge, but it still comes off as not terribly integrated.
I guess I just find that spirit, as in, it fits to me in the same way that I think it's Anton Ivanovich, the big character, of like, he wants to write this big novel, or a big work about Russia. It'd be wonderful to have this great dream, and the same thing of like, oh, wouldn't it be great to be called forward? Wouldn't it be great to one day be able to strike out and march onwards or whatever? Like, I feel like those two things are just two variations on the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In any case, whether or not it is, one thing I had to do myself is, as I was kind of going through these agonies and feeling wearied by it, I had to step back and say, will I have been glad that I read this novel? And the answer to that is an unqualified yes. And then say, why will I be glad that and it really is, I mean, part of it is what we've been describing, just, being able to look at the world through the lens of humor and the value and virtue, and being able to do that, being able to, I think there is a real, there's something to learn about not just looking at people through a superficial lens of virtue, but really understanding them in all their nuances and complexities and eccentricities. I really value that. And then he's just brilliant. I mean, that's the thing we can't forget as we're going along, is that the nature of the humor and the nature of the observations are brilliantly captured. And it's a very, that's a high level skill for a human to possess. So just inhabiting the mind of somebody who is capable of this brilliance is a real value. And I will have considered it an incredible value to have just inhabited his mind. So I'm going to give a ridiculous example of it. But I underlined this line because I loved it so much. Chiechnikov was drawn into this society by two friends who were disappointed men. Good. Okay, so, we're like, well, what are disappointed men? Tell us, Gogol. Disappointed men, good-natured fellows who became habitual drunkards through continually drinking toasts to science, enlightenment, and progress. So just that, again, that's a type, right? What are they doing there? Oh gosh, you guys have read, many of you, I think, since you're in Read With Me, have read Bold the Sweef. Remember Cornudet, the Democrat, who his highest devotion, higher than his devotion to revolution, was his devotion to beer. That was the true shrine at which he worshipped. So I just think of Cornudet here, who continually drinking to revolution just really became a drunk. That's what it amounted to. So anyway, even just comments in passing like that are enough to make it worthwhile to have read this novel. Stefan.
The comparison that's coming to my head is have you ever had a friend where you're glad to know them and you can only spend you're like, I forget why I don't see them very often. And then you hang out with them and they're a lot of fun, but it's overwhelming. And then you put them on the shelf for a couple months, maybe. That's kind of how I feel with this novel, or with him in general. That's where the weirdness comes from.
You're not going to be going to the library.
Perfect comparison. That is exactly how it is. I am so happy that you said that.
You're not going to go complete your Gogol library immediately after this.
Although they have a place in your life, you know what I mean? You want to take them out somewhere.
Yeah.
But
then take them
that's
home.
enough. Yeah.
Everybody should read The Government Inspector if you haven't, because that one is fantastic. But all right, who else do we have to talk about here? Grace, do you want to share our text exchange?
Oh,
well, so the other thing, I hadn't finished this section when I talked to Greta about this, and she said, not to give too much of a spoiler, but you're about to come to a real glutton and it's painful. It's just painful to read. So I was already feeling wearied of the, okay, yes, another type, but really, and it's funny, but he's also really gross. So yeah, I was tired of that. But anyway, tell him what happened. Had you read that section yet when you texted me?
No, not when I had texted you. And then when I got to it, I was like, do you have the ability to share the picture?
Joseph, do I have sharing abilities?
I can give you access.
Okay.
So while you do that, I'll tell the story. So I was with my daughter in my bedroom, and I was kind of just like tidying up, and she was crawling around on the floor and pulling herself up and stuff like that. And she's just kind of wandering around. And I turned my back for a second. And when I returned, she had grabbed my copy of Dead Souls, pulled out the second and third page of chapter 7, and was eating it.
So I just texted her back and said, "You have the watermelon, baby." Mm-hmm.
And she's so fat, right? So it works.
It's perfect.
She's got all them rolls. It's cute on her.
Yes. Now, I did find that character very funny, and I also found his juxtaposition with the perpetually bored character very funny. This was a scene that I actually told Seth, my 10-year-old, about last night, because the character who says, "How can you possibly be bored? You wake up, you have tea, you plan supper, then you have supper, then you plan dinner, then you have dinner, and then you're planning the next day's dinner. What's there to be bored?" That's the meaning of life. And then the guy comes over, he's like, "Oh, are you coming for dinner?" "No, I already had dinner." "Are you messing with me? What on earth would I want with you if you've already had dinner? That's the only purpose of having a human in your life, is to eat with them."
Right?
It was a funny character, but also I did not need to imagine him caught in a net in the water in his swim trunks or whatever he happened to be wearing.
It was like the description of him, like there was no danger of him drowning, like he's so fat. It was so gratuitous, but I laughed real hard.
Yeah, that was good. Okay, who do we have next, Joseph?
Stephanie, is your hand still up from before? Oh, Wendy.
Hi. Okay, I missed the first part because I was finishing reading this morning, so I'm not sure if you discussed this, but just before the glutton, that when we're still with the guy who finds everything so funny, and then okay, so was anyone else taken in by Chichikov's explanation of why he's collecting dead souls? When he said, so he tells him the story, "This is a joke. It's because I have to show my uncle, and then I'll be able to get the estate." And I was like, okay, we find, and how funny that it's just kind of this aside, and where he's telling it in order to get this guy to give him dead souls, but we're actually finally being told this. But then at the end of the chapter, it says, however, the reader may surmise for himself, the admission was by no means painful to Chichikov, especially as it is doubtful whether he ever had an uncle. And I was like,
no, I actually did not fall prey to that. What I saw in that scene was that he was being remarkably astute at how to manipulate people, because there was that one when he went to the miser and he had his planned pitch, and then he sized the guy up and he was like, "Oh, wait, I got to change the language here. You seem like a man who's very good with economy." He just turned it on. So I wasn't quite clear on this one, but I had the sense that it was something like the guy really likes to feel superior to people, and he likes to laugh at them. So if he can get him, so he told him a story to make him laugh, then he like quickly imported this story into it and made him laugh, and then he's got his dead souls. So something like that.
Right. I definitely felt like he was playing the audience, but while I was reading it, I thought that it was this funny thing where it was like the truth will actually get this guy. And so I thought we were being told the actual truth, and it was just so funny to me that again it was turned, and I'm like, oh no, he doesn't have an uncle. I still don't know.
Yeah. So he would have played you too. Watch your dead
Right.
souls.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
I just wasn't it in the end of part one they talked about that it was like a mortgage scheme or something like that, like selling it to the government, like settling
Yeah.
them in Kherson
Yeah.
province. So, okay, so that was the actual reason, right?
That was the actual reason.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I just was confused for a minute.
Yeah.
But it was a good story to tell. The other one.
Yeah.
But one thing I have to say, like, I really just liked Pytor Pytorovich just as a person. Like, I just like the fact that he just enjoys food so much. He just has this endless energy. Like, that was something that like it was like, okay, you're losing me a bit here, Gogol, but with him, it's like, oh, okay, we're having fun again. Like, this is like this, like it's just so, like two men can sit on him and be a comfortable flotation device, although there'll be a little gurgling going on. I just love this man because of just how much fun he gets out of food. Like that, like it's nice to see someone getting some kind of pleasure out of life.
Yeah. I guess in this world that's true, but also gross.
Also gross. It's like that scene from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory where Violet Beauregard like blows up into the blueberry and they have to roll her around. That's kind of how I was imagining him caught in the net.
Yes.
But I guess if in his situation, he'd be the one rolling around furiously, you know. He'd be absolute control of that situation.
You kind of just 8-miled me, because to contradict you, I was going to read the description of him, that he could not under any circumstance have drowned. The water would have always borne him on the surface. A couple of men on it. I was going to read that description to prove how repulsive he is, and then you just included it as part of his charm.
Repulsive, like to me, it's just here's a man who will die happy. Here's a man who has found his calling in life. You know, the world is food.
Oh,
like, and it's just that very long description of like, oh, can you make sure that when you're frying the lamb, there's a little pink on this side, but a little less cooked on the
my gosh.
and like, and make sure there's a bit of brains over here, and you know, just and make sure it gets all the juices gets on. And I have to say, I love it because I mentioned this before, but like when I go to a restaurant, I want to feel stuffed at the end. Like I feel anxiety that I will not.
Please incorporate into your vocabulary that there's no more room for the mayor. that was the line in there. Because there was the comparison to the mayor could still fit into church. If the mayor could fit into church, then you can fit the veal into your stomach or whatever. But then it came back later when he said, after another meal, he said there was definitely no more room for the mayor. So I think everybody should
I want to feel like after a big hot pot with friends. Like this is what life is about.
Now I have to share my favorite line from that section. I mean, maybe there were many, but it was, okay, why did you mortgage it? He says to this character. And he says, oh, no particular reason. Everybody goes in for mortgaging nowadays, so why shouldn't I do the same as the rest? They tell me it's profitable. Besides, I've always lived here, so I might as well try living in Moscow. The fool, thought Chichikov. He will spend everything and make his children spendthrifts too. You had better stay at home in the country, you fish pie. I know what you were thinking, said however you say his name. Asked Chichikov, embarrassed. You are thinking he is a fool. He is a fool, this Pyotr. He has invited me to dinner, and there is no dinner all this time. For a second, I'm like, oh, he really read his mind. No, it's just about food. It's always about food. All right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just want to check because Ray said something about, so the end of part one, is it Did I miss it? Did I not get it? Are we supposed to actually know why he's collecting the dead souls now?
Yeah, to mortgage them. That if you have a list of souls who are still on the census, you can mortgage them to the government. And then he can buy real property with real souls with using what he mortgaged. Yeah.
Okay. I think well, maybe so at the end of part 1, that's explained then.
Yes, I don't remember exactly where it was, but it came up in the last discussion, but it came up very much in passing, which we commented was kind of funny at the time. But,
right.
Waiting all this time to find out why he had been, who was he in conversation with when he explained, or was it in the description of his character? I can't remember.
I'll find his character. He wasn't talking.
Description of his character. He wasn't talking to anybody. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it was after his kind of failed scheme as in the customs department. It was in that section.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So I thought I would read, just to stimulate conversation, 2 things that I discovered when I was looking for moral support on this book. So one is, and I really should have a source to cite for this, but I can't remember. It was one of the introductions to an old edition of this book. It says, Dead Souls, which bears the word poem upon the title page of the original, has been generally compared to Don Quixote and the Pickwick Papers, while Ian Vogue places its author somewhere between Cervantes and Lesage. However considerable the influences of Cervantes and Dickens may have been, the first in the matter of structure, the other in background humor and detail of characterization, the predominating and distinguishing quality of the work is undeniably something foreign to both Cervantes and Dickens, and quite particular to itself, something which, for want of a better term, might be called the quality of the Russian soul. Now that struck me when I came to that immediately, because I had cautioned people to not kind of place this under the heading of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy because it's so different and kind. So I was like, oh, in what way does this capture the quality of the Russian soul? It says, the English reader familiar with the works of Dostoevsky, Turgenev, and Tolstoy need hardly be told what this implies. I've read them all. I needed to be told. It might be defined in the words of the French critic just named as a tendency to pity. One might indeed go further and say that it implies a certain tolerance of one's characters, even though they be, in the conventional sense, knaves, products, as the case might be, of conditions or circumstance, which, after all, is the thing to be criticized and not the man. But pity and tolerance are rare in satire, even clash with it, producing in the result a deep sense of tragic humor. It is in this sense it is this that makes of Dead Souls a unique work, peculiarly Gogolian, peculiarly Russian, and distinct from its author's Spanish and English masters. I find that interesting because I do see the common element in Russian literature of pity and kind of interest in those traditionally thought of as knaves. And that does capture something of the contrast between this and Madame Bovary, or many other things. It takes on a very different form than it does in Dostoevsky, the pity for the depraved. But anyway, just thought I'd put that out there and see if anyone has any thoughts about it, or
I find that really fascinating and maybe clarifying. I want to think more about it, but
I think that's my reaction too.
Yeah. One of the things that was in my notes that I sent to Lisa before this discussion is what is he criticizing? Clearly there's criticism here. I think again, second guessing myself. But like, what exactly is he criticizing, and kind of putting it in the idea, and maybe this is too simplified, but the idea of like criticizing like the government of Russia, but having a deep love for everything else in Russia, like all the people and the country and everything. And just criticizing the people that Chichikov is trying to mess with his scam, which is just the government. So maybe that's clarifying. I have to think more about it. I do find it very fascinating.
I think what happened I think what I was thinking in this last week is that I needed to stop asking myself what he was criticizing, that I needed to not think of it in those terms, because it seemed more to me like what he wanted to do was to present the authentic Russian soul, and that there's lots to be criticized in the process of doing that and capturing that. And he criticizes things endlessly, from the government office to people's eccentric vices to, and there's lots of things that are discreetly criticized, but not an institution or a way of life, or, nothing on that scale. So
I think that my brain is looking for this level of specificity that just doesn't exist. So I think that the quote that you read is clarifying in that respect, that like maybe like it lets me know that maybe I'm looking for too much specificity, like that's not there.
Or too much integration, a bigger integration. I mean, in a sense, presenting what he does seem to love his country, and he wants to not present it in romanticized terms, but in terms that are real, and to love and embrace what's real. So that's a goal, but it's not, we usually think of, when we think of a novel with a more tightly integrated theme, there's some kind of specific villain and specific hero or villainous way of life, or heroic way of life. And that doesn't seem to be what's happening here.
Right.
Who do we have next, Joseph?
Right. Yeah, I find that quote to be clarifying. It fits in very well. Like that's sort of a Chekhov is described, and it's kind of is where it's it's funny. Like he wants his plays to be read as comedies, but they're very deeply tragic. They're about people whose lives have these people are basically these dried leaves. So I agree with that characterization, and I just I've never looked as him as being critical. He's just pointing out, like, yeah, these are the vices people have, and that's just sort of the way they are. And it's very funny and cute, in a sense. And like sometimes those vices really are tragic in a way, but they're still kind of funny in their own way. Like Plushkin, it's both incredibly sad and it's also incredibly funny. Depending on which paragraph you're on.
Right.
So I think that describes it well. I think one thing that sort of throws off a little bit is Dostoevsky is more like, there's much more judgment with Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
He's comparatively un-Russian, but in that sense, but compared to like Tolstoy and Turgenev and Chekhov. I'm looking at my Russian shelf over here to remind myself. Like that fits. Like, well, he's in the gestalt.
I'm curious. Well, maybe Greta, when you talk, you can comment on this too, because in a sense, so Dostoevsky has a definite moral worldview, but in a sense, I think of no one as showing greater pity for the individual. I'm going to quote my own daughter, even before you speak. I was just thinking about your entrance essay to Thomas Aquinas College, and she wrote about crime and punishment. And I wish I could remember the exact phrasing of the line because it was so beautiful, but it was like, Dostoevsky thinks that we should look at humanity without an averted eye, like with it was more beautiful than this, but it's like with love and without an averted eye, like just really look at them. But love, I don't know, love the
yeah, I think I can agree. Now I think about, like, there's a big part of that of even someone like Savitri Gaylov, who's just the absolute devil, but I love him so much. But his last scenes, like, you can't help but read those in a sympathetic light, despite what he's done. But so I and there are actually even smaller characters in, like, Crime and Punishment, like the socialist roommate of Luzin, who's like, who would be a perfect Gogolite. He belongs in a Gogol novel.
Greta, and I found the exact quote because I butchered it. It was, he shows us our own faults in vulgar detail and without an averted eye. But it was in the context of having sympathy for those faults.
Well, first of all, it was about Brothers K, not.
Whoops, you're right.
But yeah. But I was just gonna say that I didn't have the experience of getting tired of this book because I had to catch up. So I've only been reading it for like 2 weeks, and I read it in big chunks. But when we got to the two people from this reading, I just like didn't want to laugh anymore. Where it's just like so gross that it's like, I don't want to laugh anymore because this is just disgusting. And so hearing that quote was helpful because it's like, oh, maybe I like don't have to laugh. Maybe Gogol is the kind of person who can look at that and like be sad and laugh. And maybe I'm the kind of person who just needs to look at it and be sad, and I don't have to think it's funny anymore.
Yet another common quality with Ulinka. I read the description of Ulinka and I was like, oh, she reminds me in certain ways of Greta. But she hears the story and she's like, I don't see what's funny.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that is funny. Yeah. But that's me, like with the glutton, I'm like, that's not funny. Like that's not funny because yeah, he's happy, but like you shouldn't be happy stuffing yourself to the point that you're physically sick every day. Like it's not funny. But
stop doing that.
Stop doing that. Yeah, so you were feeling the tears behind the laughter, like Pushkin said. Okay, Molly.
Well, what you're saying about criticism and satire made me think of other satirists and how he's not like them. I'm thinking of Twain and Swift, and how Mencken, how they're actually, they don't have pity. They're merciless in the way they mock, and they don't have that sort of, well, these are people like me kind of feeling. They just want to destroy the person they're mocking and take away their power because they're doing damage. And so they have that sort of moral righteousness. But Gogol does not. He's much more on their side. And so he doesn't take a moral stance the way a Twain or a Mencken are, like, they think they're right and they're absolutely gonna tear these people down. But that's not his goal. He's presenting them with some humor to make us enjoy
our time with them
rather than condemn them. So I think that's very different from other satirizing and critique. So I don't even see it as critique so much.
No,
like I wouldn't
use
no, I think he thinks that these characteristics are just like part of the spectrum of human characteristics. It's not it, and some of them we all recognize are annoying, and some of them we all recognize are funny, and but that's sort of the tone of it. Not,
but that's not his focus.
Could be dangerous, yeah.
Dickens, I think that was a good parallel, because Dickens is more, yeah, these people are funny and interesting, but they're not a threat to me. I'm not trying to take them down. I'm just giving them funny names and describing them thoroughly in a way that we can enjoy.
Yeah. Well, and having that shift of perspective was useful to me. Well, having a shift of perspective is always useful for relating to your fellow human beings, because I definitely know people who don't look at the world through a moral lens and do kind of judge people more on the grounds of being interesting and or in their judgment authentic, rather than and not because they've rejected morality. It's just not the framework that they bring to personal experience or to what they're seeking in life. And so this is, having that realization helped me to kind of put on the lens of that sort of person and understand how they are looking at I think of, probably most of you know people like that. I think of very definite people in my life who just, they weren't brought up religious, and they're not philosophical, but they're thoughtful and intelligent people. And so it's just not, it's not the frame, it's not a conscious framework for them. It's just, there's an array of human characteristics, and some of them they find more enjoyable than others. That's more of the standard. Also, I just want to say that you gave me another reason to enjoy this novel, because I do appreciate that aspect of it, though I might not relate ultimately with the philosophic perspective it takes on human beings and the world. A good tempering of moral judgment is that's a good experience for people to have, especially if they do have a righteous attitude toward morality. So I think that's good and healthy for us. Stefan.
So Lisa, I find this discussion of this book a little bit interesting, because if we psychologized previous authors, you kind of put up like a stop sign in a way. But it seems like since Gogol's inviting himself into this novel so much, that he's just, you know what I mean? It's his absence, well, there's no absence of him, so you have to he's there. So I think it's more interesting. I'm just saying, like, it seems appropriate to really analyze him and maybe why, is he like these characters? I know it seems like he's scolding them, but he must.
Well, that actually brings up a question, and he does say something about being like them at some point, but I'm not clear who the hell the narrator is, because at times it seems like a narrator who's not Gogol, and then there are certain times that he refers to himself as the author. Yeah. But it could be the author of the narrative of which Gogol is the author, a layer removed. But I don't think, my judgment would be that we're not supposed to think of that voice as Gogol's voice, even though
it's Don Quixote, because that's the same problem that you have in Don Quixote. Is there's like 3 layers of narrators, and you don't know who's
ever speaking.
You don't know where the joke stops, and that's with Gogol too. It's like, is the "Oh Russia" is that a joke and he's making fun of this narrator character, or is that him? Like, you really don't know.
Yeah, no wonder he went insane.
That's good.
I'm just thinking about that movie Inception, it's like you go inside someone's dream, and then you can go into a dream within a dream and stuff like that. Okay. And so now I'm thinking about
it's a fun movie. I like Inception.
It's fun. I like it.
Is it Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I have seen it. It's just been so long.
Yeah. And so now I'm just like,
but you're never quite sure what's reality.
Right.
I just have to make a small objection while she was mentioning different critics. Now I think Swift and Dickens, they come at it with a certain moral aspect. Mencken, he hates people. He really finds certain kinds of people. He calls them the bourgeoisie. But one thing aspect though about him is he has a certain fetish for it. Like, he loves seeing the stupidity. He loves making a joke out of it. Like, he has that line of it's a sort of a pseudo interview he's writing, and you ask, if you find so little to admire in our republic, why do you bother to write? And he says, why do people go to the zoo? And it's just like, I think he really just like he's deeply acid, he's deeply critical, but he's at home with it. Like and with so like, there's lots of sort of weird subtleties to how you can throw acid, and with what's his name,
Ray, you're going to start taking this personally, but I have to go answer the door again, and I'll be right back.
Okay, I'm done. All right. Yeah, so anyway, I don't mean to, but no, you're right, Molly. Those are great comparisons to make, and I think that Gogol is decidedly unmoral when you look at either of those other three. It's just interesting though how Gogol, he loves that and he feels affection for it. Mencken, he hates them, but he loves it. He loves making fun of them, like especially in that Veblen review that he did. Anyway.
I'd love to comment. I haven't read any of what you're talking about.
Mencken's great. Mencken is I've read like all of the Prejudices series, and it's like 1,000 pages, and like everything is just perfectly written and clear and biting. It's just spitting venom.
Well, maybe I'll add that to my list then.
I haven't actually read that much Mencken, but just what little I've dipped into has had that tone. So what did you recommend, Ray? Prejudices?
There's his Chrestomathy, which is like like the best of edited down, and then there's the Prejudices series. But anyway, those are just I've read. Oh my God, there was this period in my life where I was just all about Mencken. I love him.
Okay. Thank you for the recommendation.
Did Greta have something to say?
Yeah, this is kind of an aside, but just when it gets so difficult to figure out the tone of an author, I just think about how Socrates always said that like writing is bad, and he was like, we shouldn't write things, we should only be speaking. And it's just like, yeah, like I don't know, like writing is supposed to be representing speech, and it would be easier if we sat down and he were telling us this story, because then when he did the "Oh Great Russia" part, you could tell by how, like, is he like, "Oh Great Russia," and then you're like, okay, I get it, it's a joke. But when it's written down, it's just like, I have no idea what his tone is supposed to be, and it's like frustrating.
Or you could interrupt him and say, you serious here?
Yeah.
It's like text tone when you're texting your friends.
Yeah, but emails get
Dead souls
misunderstood
just
because
need
you should have just called the person because of the misunderstanding. But then the tone gets lost and you don't keep the humor of it.
No, so the real point here is that dead souls just needed emojis, right?
Or it needed
Exactly.
It's not real.
Perfect. Insert emojis and then
audiobook.
everything is clear.
Oh, I love my audiobook, by the way. I don't know if anybody is listening to it on Audible, and
Is it the Nicholas Bolton one?
it's whatever the Constance Garnett.
Yeah.
Probably.
I
He's
love him too.
fantastic. He's so
really
good. Yes, that one. It's amazing. And I'm really particular about audiobooks because I feel like you can tell, not that the rest of you aren't, but I feel like you can tell when the person actually gets the novel or not, or when they just have a reader's voice, and he clearly understands what's happening here. Okay, so I had one more quote to share for comment, and then our timing is good. Every time, once again, I came into this discussion thinking there's no way we'll have an hour and a half worth of material to discuss, and I feel like we could go longer, but all right. Obviously, this plot, which is really no plot at all, but merely a ruse to enable Chichikov to go across Russia in a troika with Selifan the coachman as a sort of Russian Sancho Panza, gives Gogol a magnificent opportunity to reveal his genius as a painter of Russian panorama, peopled with characteristic native types, commonplace enough, but drawn in comic relief. The comic, explained the author, yet at the beginning of his career, is hidden everywhere. Only living in the midst of it, we are not conscious of it. That sounds very much like Gogol to me. But if the artist brings it into his art on the stage, say, we shall roll about with laughter and only wonder we did not notice it before. But the comic, at the end of the quote, but the comic in Dead Souls is merely external. Let us see how Pushkin, who loved to laugh, regarded the work. As Gogol read it aloud to him from the manuscript, the poet grew more and more gloomy, and at last cried out, God, what a sad country Russia is. Greta, that was you. And later he said of it, Gogol invents nothing. It is the simple truth, the terrible truth. The work, on one hand, was received as nothing less than an exposure of all Russia. What would foreigners think of it? The liberal elements, however, the critic Belinsky among them, welcomed it as a revelation, as an omen of a freer future. Gogol, who had meant to do a service to Russia and not to heap ridicule upon her, took the criticisms of the Slavophiles to heart, and he palliated his critics by promising to bring about in the succeeding parts of his novel the redemption of Chichikov and the other knaves and blockheads. Isn't that interesting?
That is fascinating. And it reminds me of all the, like, when you're sitting and you're watching like a comedy special, like as a stand-up comedian, you're like, it's funny because it's true. Like in some cases, not as funny, but like the idea of just like, you know, a very particular kind of representation of something that is absolutely true, just like a very incisive observation can be really funny, and in some cases not so funny.
Ray. Oh, we can't hear you.
Just on the redemption part, it actually, okay. Well, you guys did Crime and Punishment, so if anyone hasn't, you can mute me now. But at the end of Crime and Punishment, you know, there's that bit where it's like, okay, you know, Raskolnikov finally feels like okay, I've had this religious experience. I'm now on the road to reform myself properly, and Dostoevsky says, well, that's not for me to write about, though. And I feel like that's very kind of Gogol in a sense of like, Gogol's like, yeah, I'd like to write about the reform, but I
don't know how to
really
do
can't
that
get
part.
around to that. I'm really that's not me. So I feel like that's I feel like that's connects of like, he really wants to write about the reform, and he really wants someone to say forward in his life. He means it, but you know, he can't. He's Gogol.
Right. And I agree with that, but the only thing I would say is that because he can't, he needs to leave those parts out. He just don't. That tone shift, he might want to be that, but he isn't. So that's why it feels out of place.
Well, it feels in place for me of, there is that sense of futility in that. Like, you know, it's not like it really is just waking up one day and like, all right, everything's gonna go. Like believe in the future. There is that sense of, yeah, it would be great, wouldn't it? But you know, I'm Gogol. We're Gogols. You know, we can't un-Gogol.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I. So again, it just fits that sense of, it's a very Russian thing to build, at least in Russian novels, to just like have big intentions. We're gonna go places. We're gonna reform. And then it all falls apart immediately. You know, that's lots of War and Peace. That's lots of oh god, Ivanov, which is a Chekhov play. It happens all over the place.
Well, we are going to see where it ends up in the next discussion, because we are ready to finish the book now. And Grace and I are up for a discussion next Sunday. I don't know what your holiday weekend plans are, but if you can make it at the usual time on Sunday morning, we will be there ready to discuss the ending.
Maybe we'll all be feeling like the watermelon guy.
Yeah.
I can only hope.
Lisa, I'm curious, what kind of food do you get catered? Like Thanksgiving food or
Thanksgiving food? Yeah, we just
okay.
we are going to cook some side dishes to, you know, to make some interesting, but I'm not going to make a turkey. That's not my thing. All right. I will see you guys next week.